My name is Mr. Reggie Brewer. I work with the Lumbee tribe in Robinson County with the Lumbee Tribe Boys and Girls Club. I've been there going on 15 years now. I love my job. I work with young people. I've been working with them for a long time. And what we do there is, what I do there is cultural preservation. I teach them beadwork, pottery, and we make canoes and wigwams and fish weirs and all sorts of things to keep our culture alive. So what I would like to do at this moment is do a proper introduction in the way that we would say an introduction. I would like to say to you, Tanake, Tiene Yedu. I said, hello, how are you? Kataba Shiral Nindasere. I speak Kataba and Shiral. Yihawut Ishwa, we're people of the dark water. And my Indian name is Yasikon, is Red Snake. I am Yasikon, Red Snake. And that's what I go by. Some of the people back home, they'll call me Red Snake. And that's an honor when you call somebody by their Indian name. So I was asked to come here to do a ceremony and in our way. And what I will speak to you about is the 7 directions in the beginning, our 7 directions. But I would like to speak a little bit about the group of people here in the beginning. You know, I see the 3 races of man here tonight. And when in the 1400s, in the Tidewater area, one time in the Tidewater area, what we call is Jamestown. That was how it was at that time. There was a triracial community there of people somewhat getting along too. We were, you know, everybody wants to think that when the Europeans got off the boat, we went straight to war, but that was not necessarily true. What we did is we started exchanging ideals and trying to live together. You know, and I sometimes I think about the Europeans, the English especially. You know, they got on a ship and they crossed that ocean. And they knew, now most of them knew that they were never going back home. They were never going back to their home. And it makes me wonder sometimes when I think about it, I say, how could somebody get on a ship and leave their home and they know that they're never going back? That tells me something was terribly wrong over there for them to be able to do that and come here and make a life for themselves and their families. But that was how it was in the beginning. And then we met each other and we started exchanging ideas about farming, how to live together. You had brought some really cool items over that we like, metal, and single loading guns, muzzle loader guns, and black powder guns, and we liked that because it made it easier for us to hunt deer. And we had a lot of deer, and they liked the deer hides and the beaver pelts in that way. So that began a relationship. And then later on, we know that the slaves came over too. Eventually, slaves started coming over and working too, which we know that it was not really a happy situation, but in the beginning, it was not as bad as it turned out to be in the 1800s. We know that it was not the way it was like it was in the 1800s, because we knew that in the 1700s, we'd have history that they were intermarrying with each other. The Indians, the Europeans, and Africans were intermarrying. Later on, that changed. So that was just a little introduction about our homeland. I feel good being here today because I know that our people were once here in this area. But what I really came here to speak to you about is the 7 directions, the sacred 7 directions. There are 7 sacred directions in our way of life. And in our tribal colors, the colors are red, yellow, black, and white. And I would like to start off in the east. The east is the red color for us because that's where the sun rises. That red color represents an infant child when that child is born. And the reason why that red color represents an infant child is born is because every morning the sun rises. It's a new beginning. It's a new day, it's a new beginning. So whatever I did yesterday, it doesn't matter because that sun rises and I get a new beginning, I get a clean slate, I get a new beginning, and I can start all over again in that way. It is also dedicated to the Red Nation, the Red people. We'll move over to the South. The South is yellow. The South is the time of, the red was for the fall, for the spring. The yellow is for the summer. It also represents the adolescent child. It's the time of growth. That's when we grow our gardens, we plant our gardens, we're growing. Everything is just wonderful. It's even when we hear of summertime, we say, boy, summertime's coming. We're going to have fun this summer. We're going to go do this. We're going to do, not thinking that there's not any dangers. And that's how young people are. Young people, they don't look at the dangers in life, but that's how we were when we were in the summer of our lives. All of us were in the summer of our lives at one time. And we don't look at the dangers in that way, in that area. And that yellow direction is dedicated to the Yellow Nation. And I'll explain this more later on when we get to close to the end. We'll move on to the West. The West is the place where the Thunder Beings reside. It's black. The West also reminds us of death. It reminds us of death. That's one thing that most Indian people, even in the old days, they wanted to face death. Death was not a thing that we wanted to shun or try to hide or run from. Again, it's the place where the water comes from. The Thunder Beings come from the West, and they bring the rains that we need, and it's dedicated to the adults. In that way, when we become in those days, the evil days of our lives, and as adults, and we start looking at our lives, and that death is there, and it is the fall of our life. We know that we're heading in another direction in that way. And it's also dedicated to the Black Nation. And then we'll move to the North. The North is my favorite place. And the reason why the North is my favorite place is where our elders reside. It's the place that we want to get to. And a lot of us here, we're starting to get to that place. I myself, I'm coming into my North. Being 62, I'm getting ready to walk into that northern place in my life. It's a place of purification. It's the place where we start we do that introspection, and we start looking at our lives, and we start getting things in order, and we say, this is what I need to be doing, and we got these children over here, we got to prepare for them, and the most important thing about the North for me is that I was told that it's where the Creator God resides. In the farthest part of the North is where Creator God resides at. And that's the direction that we want to go in. We want to be there, close to our Creator, building that relationship with our Creator, and in that way. Remember I said there's 7 directions. Those are 4. And then the 5th direction is the earth, Mother Earth, giving honor to the earth, because the earth provides everything that we need. When we ride down the road and we see cars and we see airplanes flying in the air, those materials came from somewhere. Those materials came from the earth. Creator had it planned that there would be a day where we would need to move around fast, and we need to be able to communicate and come and visit like we're visiting today. So those things came from the earth. Our foods come from the earth. The water that we need that sustains our lives, it comes from the earth in that way. So we give honor to the earth. That the 6th direction is the sky world. And we always look up to the sky world, keep our heads up to the sky world, looking to the Creator, keeping a good attitude in that way, and giving thanks to the sky world, because the sky's there, the stars are there, the moon's there. When we look up there, those things stir up emotions in us, and we say, wow, what a world we live in, how great this world is that we live in in that way. That seventh direction is the most important direction. When Creator created us, he put a gift inside of each one of us, a small, still voice inside of each of us. That's where that seventh direction is. That seventh direction tells me, you know, when I decide I'm going to do something and I know that it's not right, there's a small, still voice telling me, hey, you might have to pay if you do that. There's going to be a consequence behind that if you do that. Or it says, why don't you do it this way? But that's up to me to choose. Because I had that free will, that's up to me to be able to choose that. But that gift is there. And I say be aware of that small, still voice inside of yourself in that way. So what I would like to do now, since we know that there's 7 directions, I would like to light a little sage, and we're going to give thanks to those directions. First of all, though, I have a conch shell. I'm going to blow that conch shell, and I'm going to add, why we blow that conch shell is we're asking the Creator, we're calling out to the Creator, please hear us, I'm calling you to hear us. And he said he'll hear us when we call on him, that the Creator will hear us and he'll come and help us. He'll help us in our time of need. This is an awesome group of people here today, and I'll blow this shell for you. We burn this sage. This sage creates a calming effect. And we burn it to give thanks to the Creator. And I would like to light this sage and honor you in this way by burning this sage to create this calming effect, to create the mood that we're going to have tonight, and help Nancy out with her great story that she's going to share with you tonight. I would like to thank you. It has been an honor to be here. In our way, we don't have a word for goodbye. And what I would like to say to you is Yani Kate. If you'd like to say it together, we can say it together. Yani Kate. I'll see you later. But the most important word I want to tell you is Nimosa. Let's say it together now. Yani Kate. Nimosa. Nimosa means I love you. So if you don't remember anything I told you tonight, remember that word, Nimosa. It's so important in our lives. Thank you.
How's everybody doing tonight? I just want to thank one of my tribal brothers, Reggie. I'm a member of the Lumbee tribe, and we have 4 members here, and it's just always good to be in the presence of family members. So I'm Quinn Godwin. I'm the Associate Director of the new North Carolina American Indian Heritage Commission. And we were created by the 2021 State Budget Act. And along with myself and Director Curry Bird, we were hired 2 years ago, actually 2 years ago, 2 weeks ago, to build this commission from scratch. We're modeled after the African American Heritage Commission. They're about a decade older than us, so they've helped us streamline the process of coming up with everything from the logo to our mission statement, strategic plan, and everything. So I'm really proud to be here to bring you blessings and greetings from them. We actually, in addition to the 2 staff, we have 1 representative from each of the state-recognized tribes, along with the Eastern Band of Cherokee, and 4 urban Indian organizations. And a lot of people don't know about our urban Indian organizations, but you have one in Cumberland County, Metrolina, which is Mecklenburg County, the Triad in Greensboro, and Triangle Native American Association. And these are really catch-all organizations, not just for the tribes of North Carolina, but for all tribes. You know, in particular with Cumberland County, you have a lot of soldiers that are coming in that are not necessarily North Carolina tribes. So those urban Indian organizations help give them a home away from home, so to speak. So Some of our programs, if you look on our website, it's aihc.nc.gov. We've really grown over the past 2 years, our oral history program. We've gotten about 24 2-hour long interviews from tribal elders around the state. And the only tribe that we haven't touched is the Meherrin. So we've gotten from the 7 tribes multiple interviews. It's audio and visual, so you can see what contemporary Indians look like today and hear about things they've gone through, civil rights, segregation-era Indian schools. It's really interesting, so I would encourage you to look at our website and our YouTube channel, hold that up as well. Another big program that we're finally seeing come to fruition is our historic marker program. We already have one for the Department of Natural Cultural Resources, but these really, we've gotten 7 for our state recognized tribes, and it's just a nice way to show that these tribes still remain here. And we're here to talk about tonight, before contact. And one of our charges for the commission is to fill the gaps that might be there historically, particularly in the 18th century, of how we got from our ancestors, the old tribes that used to be here, like the Tuscarora and the Catawba, to our contemporary tribal governments. And each one, by having the equity of one-to-one representation, we hear from each of these tribes and their urban Indian organizations. So I'm really happy to be here to support one of our commissioners, Commissioner Nancy Strickland Fields-Chavis. She just got reappointed to her 2nd term along with all of the other representatives. And this is the stuff that we want to see more of, programs like this. Obviously, a lot of programs were already going on before we were created, but we just want to be that unifying force and not necessarily have information in silos and get it out to the people. So we're here for the history. So I'm glad to be here. Again, check out our website. It's aihc.nc.gov. And I just want to wish Commissioner Fields a good presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. And a special thank you to Mr. Reggie Brewer. Thank you so much for that presentation. And that blessing. Thank you. So this is our inaugural, I'm Chrystal Regan, Executive Director here at Tryon Palace. Thank you all for being here. This is a marvelous crowd. I mean, you look really good from here. So thank you for being here tonight. This is our inaugural community class program here at Tryon Palace. For those of you who follow the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, you know that this was a program conceived when I was Education Section Chief at the Museum of History, and we're bringing it down east. We're looking at a series of educational talks and programs focusing on this original history at the seat of original government in the Carolina colony, and we're going to focus on those undertold and underrepresented stories. And the promise is that all of us will see ourselves. All of you, we will all see ourselves in this story as we work on this path towards celebrating America 250. So stay with us. There'll be something for everyone as we plan these programs. And we hope to just reveal more about our past as we pull together the fabric of who we are as Americans and people living in America. I also want to give a special thanks to Bob and Carol Mattocks, who could not be with us here tonight, but they have been real staunch supporters of the programming here, and they were responsible for supporting and sponsoring this reception. So I want to thank them. I also want to take a moment to recognize any Tryon Palace commissioners and foundation members who are here with us tonight. If you just raise your hand, because thank you. I have an amazing staff, and most of them you will have run into from the moment of registering and checking in and getting a band or even being told where the restrooms are. We have an amazing staff here at Tryon Palace, and I just want to thank them for taking this journey for new journey with me for new programming. I also want to thank Cypress Hall for their culinary presentation tonight. And so with that, I want you to take about 5 minutes, finish your hors d'oeuvres and talk with your friend, take a restroom break, because in 5 minutes, well, let me say that, 5 to 8 minutes, we are going to start on time. I promise, Nancy. We're going to start on time. So at 6:35, I will be at the podium in Cullman Hall. So please take a moment to wrap up, take a break if you need, and then make your way to Cullman Hall for this marvelous presentation. Thank you. Well, thank you all for being on time. Thank you for being on time. We're going to go ahead and get started. The main attraction is Nancy Strickland Fields-Chavis, and I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about Nancy. Nancy is a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina and has over 20 years of experience focused in museum education, curation, and administration. She was employed by the Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., and the American Indian Cultural Center and Museum, now First American Museum in Oklahoma City. Her current role is director and curator of the Museum of the Southeast American Indian at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Through the lens of art, cultural, and historical curation, Nancy's work seeks to publicly share authentic stories of Indigenous peoples. Recently, as guest curator at the North Carolina Museum of Art, Nancy brought to life the significant exhibition To Take Shape and Meaning, Form and Design in Contemporary American Indian Art, featuring three-dimensional works of art from American Indian artists across the United States and Canada. Nancy is the first Lumbee graduate of the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she received a bachelor's degree in museum studies. She earned a master's degree in history from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and currently a doctoral student in public history at North Carolina State University. Nancy is a commissioner for the North Carolina American Indian Heritage Commission and trustee for the North Carolina Humanities Council. She recently completed a term on the Southeast Museum's Conference Board and is a proud member of Alpha Phi Omega sorority. Nancy is married to Mr. Harlan Chavis, Jr. She has one daughter, Casey, and one granddaughter, Kinley Jane. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Miss Nancy Strickland Fields-Chavis.
I sound really good on paper. I am so excited to be with you all this evening, and I'll tell you, I can come in prepared for events like this, but when Reggie does his presentation and he does that ceremony, it just stirs something in my soul. And I want to thank you again for that. It was such a blessing, I think, for all of us. Yes, thank you. And I also want to thank Chrystal and Tryon Palace for this invitation. It's so important for Native peoples to be able to have space in our historical places and our homelands. We certainly have a long and strong relationship with Tryon Palace, and it's wonderful to be here tonight and share some of our stories. Let me see what else. Y'all, I just have to tell you, there's a few things about me. I'm just going to go ahead and put it out right now because it will help me stay on time and have a discussion with you all. I'm very Southern, and if it's okay with you all, I'm also very personable, and I would like to deliver my discussion. I really see this as a discussion this evening. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. I think I just have a sense, there's just such warmth and such welcome here. I just feel at home, and I feel like you all are family, and I just cannot thank you enough for that hospitality and that welcome. And I was going to say the other thing. So I turned 50, and then I got married at 50. So, yeah, you better clap. And then after I did all that, then I need readers. And so lots of change in life. So bear with me as I fumble through readers and kind of make this transition. Because it's weird, right? You look down and then everybody's blurry and back and forth. I'm getting used to it, though. I'm making my way. I I think I captured everything. The one thing that I also wanted to add was that the story that was, the song that was playing when you first came in was by Mohawk women. And so there was a very strong Iroquoian presence here that was Tuscarora, but certainly other Iroquoian peoples had a connection here, whether they were visiting kin or coming through for different reasons. And so what I loved about that particular Mohawk song is that it is Iroquoian, and I love anytime we can place language in programming. That's really important. But it was also centered around water. So if you got to see the lyrics or saw what the lyrics said, it was like, we love the water. Water is sacred to us. It's powerful. Water also is a sacrament for prayer. And I think that that's very important to where we are here in New Bern, where you all are surrounded by water. And you all are surrounded by sacred water. So it was important to share that song, and I hope it was a blessing to you all as well. So I am the director of the Museum of the Southeast American Indian, which is in Pembroke, North Carolina. How many of you have been to see our museum at the No, shame on y'all. I can say that because we're family. So I am going to formally invite you all to come visit us at the Museum of the Southeast American Indian. What we're talking about tonight and then the subsequent programs, this is the storytelling that we do at the museum. This is the center and the core of the content that we share at our museum, and you will be in the heart of Lumbee community. So not only for a visit to our museum, but just to visit our community, we welcome you and we love to have you. So tonight what I want to focus on is sort of a 1491 moment. And that's really important because this serves as a foundational time frame for our upcoming program, but it also allows us to explore cultures pre-contact, which is really interesting because usually where the conversation sits is right at contact and then afterwards. And so the other important thing is that many of the peoples that we are going to talk about and explore tonight are the same peoples that were present for contact, and which they have their own very interesting and pivotal, I'm going to use that word, pivotal experiences as well. So what I want us to do, and here we go with clicking. I'm leaning into technology a little bit, so hopefully this is going to keep working for us. This video, in fact, is of the Neuse River, and Rob in the back, our sound guy. This is actually his drone footage, which he did a great job at this. But what I want to share with this slide is really how I want to set the tone for this evening. And I want us to humanize the story that I'm going to share with you tonight. I don't want us to think about historicizing or thinking about hard fixed dates. I don't want us to necessarily think about applying anthropology or archaeology to this story, but think about the human experience of what I'm going to share this evening. So, as I mentioned, as Native people, I rarely get invited to present about pre-contact Native cultures in such an authentic way. And again, I have to applaud Tryon Palace for this invitation. Typically, when talking about Native cultures, an anthropological lens is applied to the history, not a focus on authentic culture. What I would like for you to do with me this evening is humanize this historical experience, relate to the peoples that I am sharing with you as everyday people, albeit from the past, people who live full lives just as we do today. They were young and old, parents and grandparents, leaders and everyday folks living their lives. Those of you who live in Eastern North Carolina, they love their homes and were intimately connected to this place just like you are. They loved the land, the water, they dreamed, they worshiped here, they worried, and they counted their days, each of the days of their lives, just like you do. And of course, this is part of the beauty that attracts people to this region, right? The water, the land, the absolutely breathtaking landscape. It is stunning. And so to situate Native peoples that would have been looking out over these same waters, probably the ancestors of the same trees, certainly the generations of the same species, and enjoyed the same things that you did, right? These were human beings. These were people. I emphasize this because in my work, and I've been doing this for a long time, y'all heard the list of all the places I've been, over 20 plus years, that sometimes, and especially when I was at the National Museum of the American Indian, it's difficult for people to humanize Indians in historical context. Sometimes, and even more so at the museum where I am today, it's hard for people to sometimes look at Native peoples and see them as the same descendants of the same peoples of the past. Now, if you're dressed out in regalia, that's a different story. Then people are like, oh, okay, you're Indian. But it's hard to make the connection. And so when there's that sort of carving out, I think, areas and aspects of identity, then it's hard to humanize people, right? It's hard to say, wow, that's a grandmother or grandfather, or this person did extraordinary things. So that's why I'm really emphasizing tonight is about humanizing this story. So with that said, I wanted to take a moment to talk about the tribes that are here in North Carolina today. And there are still a lot of us around. And thanks to sort of the 1930s and 40s in agriculture, and a lot of us living in rural communities, there's more now than ever. We had a huge population boom. And so the tribes that are in North Carolina today are Coharie, Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, Haliwa-Saponi, Lumbee, Meherrin, Occaneechi Band of Saponi Nation, Saponi, and Waccamaw-Siouan. There's also 5 urban Indian centers across the state that serve as spaces for Native people to gather together and celebrate culture, to have resources, and to have a sense of community in urban places like Fayetteville, Raleigh, Charlotte, and Greensboro. How many of you know that there are 8 tribes in the state of North Carolina? Few of you. Very good. And each of these tribes has a website, and of course, Quinn shared a little bit earlier about their website. There's a calendar of events. Get out and meet Native people. Let us host you and spoil you and have fun with you and laugh with you. We are excellent cooks, okay? I don't know about the other people, but in Eastern North Carolina, we do delicious collard sandwiches and chicken bog. Really good. Okay, come on down. So we have powwows. Every tribe has a powwow. We are embarking on powwow season right now. Who's the first to come up next? Is it Coharie? And early September is Coharie's powwow, and then it just keeps going weekend after weekend after weekend. And then the urban Indian centers also have powwows. So that is on the commission's website as well. So just kind of wanted to give you a lay of the land. Indian people are still here. We're thriving. We're doing pretty well. And of course, a lot of these tribes are descendants of the people that we are going to talk a little bit about tonight. I'm loving all these. I've never done so many landscape slides in a presentation in all my life, but I'm loving it. So what you're looking at is Georgetown, South Carolina. How many of you have been to Georgetown, South Carolina? How many of you love Georgetown, South Carolina? Oh, okay, the less hands that went up, okay. There's such a vibe, for lack of better words, at Georgetown, and it's one of my favorite places. And of course, like here, it is astoundingly beautiful. The landscape is so commanding. And Georgetown, South Carolina, of course, is defined by Weapemeoc Bay. And Weapemeoc Bay has 5 rivers that feed back up into the eastern part of North Carolina and South Carolina, and some even go further back into the interior, that all culminate in Weapemeoc Bay within 1 mile of each other, which is pretty interesting. And so as Native peoples, we utilized Weapemeoc Bay as a gathering place. So the Weapemeoc tribe was there. There were several other tribes that lived around what today we would think of as Georgetown proper. But it served as this hub of where Native peoples could come in that lived further into the interior by way of the river and then gather around Weapemeoc Bay. So it was a major source of commerce and a gathering place. And of course, it provided us opportunities to go to the coast, among many other coastal regions such as Wilmington. But for those of us that were living further into the interior, to do things like fish, saltwater fish. If you know any Lumbees, you know that we love to go spots fishing, so down at the coast. So that's an annual activity that we engage in for time immemorial. Gave us an opportunity to go down and collect salt. Seashells that were very important, like the conch shell that Reggie shared with us this evening. And Native people were not fixed and static to the landscape. We got out just like everybody else and did things. We went on vacations, even pre-contact. There was seasonal living where people would go down, live at the coast, and then when it would get cooler, they would move further inland. And we would engage with one another. Sometimes people would meet folks of different tribes and fall in love and maybe get married at 50, like I did. Let's see. Hopefully I didn't overtalk my loop here. There we go. So with that in mind, I want to share a story with you all. One of the most powerful stories that I have ever come across in the historical record, and in fact, I think my husband, okay, you found it. He found it, not I think. He found this wonderful story, and then I've latched onto it because it is absolutely incredible. So I want you to think about the landscape and what you're looking at. Those of you that have been to Georgetown, think about where you've been and how you enjoyed it being there. So there was a young man named Francisco de Chicora. And Francisco de Chicora was probably in his adolescence, I would say somewhere between 10, 11, maybe 12. He lived right on the Santee River where it comes into Winyah Bay, and this was home to him. It's a place he loved. It's where his family was from. It's where his ancestors were from. It's where he had lived his whole life, and so had his family. Now, what's interesting about Winyah Bay is that as a hub, as much of a hub as it was for Native people, when the Spanish start exploring these areas in the very early 1500s, they find it extremely convenient as well, because they see all of these Native peoples are coming into this region from the interior. They're able to get information about where tribes are located, how many people are further up into the interior, and of course, in the early 1500s, people were trying to understand what were the resources here in the New World. One of the first and immediate resources that they identified were human resources. And so Francisco de Chicora was kidnapped by a Spanish explorer named Francisco Gordillo, and another slave trader named Pedro de, I'm not good at these names, so bear with me. I think it's Huizos or Huitos. He was taken to Hispaniola, where he and there were 70 other captives who were captured with him at the same time. And he was taken to Hispaniola in the Caribbean, where he learned Spanish, and he was baptized as Catholic. And then he began to work for Lucas Vasquez de Leon, who was a colonial official. Now, Lucas Vasquez de Leon took in Francisco de Chicora, which is his name that he was given. We don't know his indigenous name. And he took him to Spain and presented him to the royal court. Now, the one thing about Francisco de Chicora is he was one heck of a gifted storyteller. So Francisco de Chicora told fascinating tales about his homeland, which then the Spanish had deemed Chicora. And he told them about there were giants that lived near his village. And these giants had long blonde hair that went all the way down to their feet, and that they were governed by a gigantic king who was called Datha. And he ruled over this whole tribe of giants that looked much like the people that were there in Europe. In fact, I think that Francisco de Chicora probably expanded on that and said, these men are giants, but they look just like you. Everyone was fascinated with the stories that Francisco de Chicora told. In fact, King James had requested that an Italian historian, Peter Marta, record his stories. And so he continues to tell these fantastic stories about his homelands, about these giants, and some of the giants have these long tails that they have to bury in the ground, and they can only eat fish, and they're just absolutely sensational. So Elion takes Francisco de Chicora back to the Caribbean, and then he decides to try to establish another colony. So he takes 600 colonists with Francisco, and they decide to strike back out and head towards Winyah Bay because they want to see these giants. They want to see all of these fantastic creatures and possibly people that Francisco has told them about for the past 6 years. So one can imagine you've been kidnapped from your home, you've been held hostage, you've sort of played along with the people that you're with, you've learned a different language, you've converted your religion, you've done all the things, always holding on to hope that one day you would make it back home. Let's see here. I'm going to keep going with the drama of this. And so he gets on the ship, and one can imagine probably the disbelief that he had that he was back on a ship that was setting sail to go back home. He makes it all the way across the ocean. I think from where they were coming from in the Caribbean, it was about a 1.5-month voyage. And then he sees this. He gets back to what is familiar. He gets back to what is home. As he pulls in and he's back in his ancestral waters, he smells that salt. He feels that breeze. He's home. He recognizes this place. And so he guides the Spanish just up on the Santee River. And he tells them, I think this is where it was. It's been some years. I think I can remember where it was. Well, when they get up the Santee River, the ship can't sail any further because there are sandbars. And it ends up kind of becoming stuck in the sandbars. So they disembark off of the ship. And then Francisco says, yes, I remember. It is coming back to me now. Just over here. Follow me. So some of the Spanish follow him to where his village is and hopefully to where these fantastic giants are that he wants to see. Well, as soon as Francisco sees an opportunity and a familiar pathway, he cuts off. He's gone. He takes off, never to be seen again. I'm happy we applauded for that. Why are we happy? We're happy because he made it home against all odds, against all reality. And why? Because this place meant something to him. It was his home. It was his indigenous homelands. It's where his family was. It's where he came from. It is what informed his identity and everything about him. He used the one thing that he had against all odds. He used his gift of storytelling to get him a ticket home, which is absolutely incredible and powerful. And I share that with you because as we talk about and continue our conversation, that's how everyone felt. Everyone felt that same way about this land. Everyone felt that way about where their communities were from, their connection to place, their connection to the land, where they drank water from, what were their experiences, where they held ceremony. This place meant something, and it was defined by their own terms, much differently than how we think of it and look at it today. And it's interesting also to think about how we have connection to land and place, that the core values that connect us to that are love and experience, memories, the things that define who we are. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about a philosophy called bounded space, that there is a Jicarilla Apache philosopher. Well, now I got to take these off to read up there, Lord. Whose name is Viola Cordova. And before I go into the definition, I want us to look at this wampum belt. So Native people used wampum from here and further up the eastern seaboard to create these shells. And this was actually fluid among the three groups that we're going to talk about in a little bit: Iroquoian, Algonquin, and Siouan. But primarily the Algonquin and Iroquoian peoples. So they would take shells the quahog shells and other shells to make wampum. And they would make these belts to use a visual language to record histories. And so this belt comes from the Meherrin, and I took this from their website, and it says, "The Meherrin Belt of Three Rivers. This belt tells the story of three rivers traveled by our people, the Meherrin, these being the Meherrin River, New River, and Kanawha River, and the three main villages of the Meherrin people." And then it lists those, and I'm not going to butcher those names. Now, with that in mind, let's look at what bounded space is. So place or space reveals the richness of knowledges and categories of thought specific to our geographic locations. Jicarilla Apache philosopher Viola Cordova describes these geographic locations as bounded space, a physical location delineated by natural lines created by rivers, lakes, plains, deserts, and mountains occupied by a group of people for generation. The knowledge developed over time is a result of ongoing dynamic relationship between people and place and reflects the unique methods we as Indigenous peoples have respectively created to make sense of our bounded spaces. Understanding place-based, I can never say that, ontologies provides insight into the naming and organizing of knowledge specific to any given community. The respect for bounded spaces, deep domain knowledge, story work, and Indigenous expertise are integral to the work of creating Indigenous knowledge systems. That's a lot, right? So what are we saying here? So bounded space is key to culture and identity, and they are intimately connected to place, and these places are sacred, just like when we looked at Francisco de Chicora. These places hold the graves of our ancestors and our genetic memory. Many of our names come from the landscape or our lands and waters. So for instance, Lumbee is people of the dark water. These homelands define who we are as a people. Our homelands, in fact, define our material culture. We gather our materials here from our homelands, and they define what our baskets are made of, what our clay is made of. What do we have to put in that clay to make it stronger? What designs are reflected in the material culture, whether it's our rivers, our sounds, our oceans, our plains, or our mountain ranges? Our homelands define how we live and build our houses, whether they are long houses or round dove houses that can sustain hurricanes. These places hold our ceremonial grounds and grow the food we eat to celebrate and give thanks for our lives and blessings, the food we use to pay tribute and as sacrament, the animals and crops that depend on the unique environments of our homelands. These are the very spaces that we're sitting on right now. So, if someone were to make a basket, they're going to collect materials that are from this area, probably, right? And they're going to continue that tradition, and they're going to pass that knowledge on from one person to the next person. Same thing with clay or the designs or like the wampum that we were looking at. If they're from the mountains of North Carolina, those traditions are going to look very different. So that is the intimacy and the connection, the food, the place, the water, what inspires people. What is the material used here to make material culture? How are those utilitarian objects used every day that reflects the landscape? So that, in my view and version, is what bounded space is. So, as we're thinking about space, I resisted so hard to tie into like a post-contact resource, but I wanted to include a map. And this was a map that was produced, I think it was produced from a John White watercolor, and this is a DeBry engraving, which is a copy of that watercolor. The orientation is a little different. Do you see how the orientation is off a little bit from eastern North Carolina? And I think that's all about perspective, right? They were just looking from a different angle. But it's important to look at all of the tribes that are in the landscape in eastern North Carolina. And there are many that aren't recorded, but this map was very important not only to take back to England and say, these are the people that we encountered, it was also to know who's living around you. Right? Who's beyond Roanoke, in this case, with the Roanoke colony. And so this kind of provides a very early peek at some of the tribes that were in the area. So here's a more clear version. So there's 3 different language families that lived in eastern North Carolina. And so the way I oriented this was literally a little bit over the Virginia line, all the way down to the South Carolina line. And particularly looking at this core area of where we are in New Bern. So there's 3 different language groups. And what that means is that these peoples spoke very different languages. And it's interesting because this is one of the few places that you have 3 different linguistic groups living side by side with one another. It happens on the Great Plains in California, I think, and there is maybe one other place in the Great Lakes. It's a phenomenon that we have to talk about. Anthropologists are curious how that happened, and because typically one group of people will override another. But they were living here, in fact, right around New Bern, that you could go 10 miles and find an Algonquin group, 10 miles and find an Iroquoian group, and another 10 miles and find a Siouan group, and they were intermingling with one another. So these are a list of just some of the peoples that I listed here, and of course, probably the most prominent and recognizable of this list, especially around New Bern, is the Tuscarora. But you can see there were many, many people living in and around the area. So one of the things that people always want to know was how many, right? People want to quantify and qualify the numbers of people that were living in a certain area. It is presumed, and there's a few different sources, but I kind of factored sort of a median number on this, that there was about 50,000 Native peoples living in eastern North Carolina at this 1491 moment. That's a lot of people. That is an astounding number of people. And we can see how that kind of flings in the face of a void landscape, sparsely populated, not many people around. Some of these early comments about Native peoples. And so it was a very high number. I'm going to lean into this a little more for our next presentation in a couple of months. But I do want to point out that, of course, when we think about the colonists coming in and then meeting with the folks at Roanoke and other tribes, they were trying to, I'm not going to use the word escape, but leave some conditions in and around England that were not desirable. And let's be honest, the water was horrible, right? They had decent beer, but to drink. And the sanitation conditions were really bad. The politics were bad. The country overall at that time was not in great shape. So their lens is thinking about when any of us are in bad situations, we're immediately coming up with the solutions to improve. If this were different, it would look like this. Oh, if I could change this, I would do this. Well, when they come and they settle in and around Roanoke, they find there's clean water. There's no pollution. These people have a sophisticated form of government. They are organized in communities and have connections with one another. There is an economy among them. There's a lot of good food. Thank God we kept that tradition going. And so there were lots of things that were attractive and beneficial. In fact, it was John White who sent word back to Queen Elizabeth and said, I think that we need to follow their lead more than they follow ours. And she said, that is absolutely ridiculous. We are going to follow suit and Christianize and colonize and also try to, have a collaborative relationship. One of the reasons that was so important and to kind of take a softer stance than the Spanish is that we view the Spanish as absolutely brutal and kicked them out of the region, which is why none of us are speaking Spanish today. And there was a lot of female leaders to thank for that, and you're welcome. So just wanted to throw that little bit out there. So about 50,000 people, densely populated. And now we're going to look at leadership and governance. And so when we have 3 different linguistic groups, we also have different ways of leading and governing. And again, we're going to kind of just keep ourselves in this 1491 moment. And this is important because 500 years before this, it would have been very different. 1,000 years before that, it would have been very different. And of course, in 1500, things become vastly different again. The evolution of humanity, right? It's what all societies do. So when we're going to first look at the Algonquin. And so the Algonquin at this time were already starting to form a confederacy. And this was under Powhatan's grandfather. And there were about 10 tribes of Algonquin-speaking peoples that were aligned with one another underneath the protection of what would become the Powhatan Confederacy. They were also required to pay tribute, which were taxes, and they paid those taxes in the form of corn and other food goods and other manufactured goods such as copper. We had an obsession with copper gorgets. Women and men, too, love to adorn themselves. The other method of tribute, which actually translated among all of these societies, were freshwater pearls. A lot of times people think of Native peoples and they think turquoise, right, and silver. Our adornment were freshwater pearls. And the more pearls that a person wore, more strands of pearls a person wore, man or woman, the higher in status they were. Our pearls from our rivers, even right here, came from mussels, and they produced different colors of pearls. So they were purples and pinks and greens and whites and blacks, and they were lustrous, and they were small, and then some were even as large as golf balls. So those were items that were used to trade and pay tribute and things that we collected. The Powhatan Confederacy, certainly by the time we get to the 1600s, had amassed 30 tribes, many of which were in North Carolina and fell under this paramount chief, which was Powhatan, and was an absolute military force. And we will talk a little bit about that in the next presentation, but a lot of us know how that plays out. So most of the Algonquin people were connected just here and across the line in Virginia. The Iroquoian Confederacy was loosely governing, but the Tuscarora here were mainly autonomous among themselves. And we know that the Tuscarora had many villages in and around this area, and they were absolutely fierce, to put it mildly. There were two other Tuscarora groups here, including the Meherrin, but the Tuscarora by far wielded a lot of power and might. In fact, within this region, the Tuscarora, yes and no, seem to have, and hear them tell it, sort of dominance over a lot of the tribes in eastern North Carolina, which is very interesting. But they did wield a lot of power, and they were still connected to their kin up in and around the New York area, so the Seneca, the Mohawk, the Onondaga, and the Oneida. And we do know the outcome of what happened after the Tuscarora, that many left and were invited by 5 nations to join up in New York and become 6 nations. The Mississippian chiefdoms were part of mound-building societies that had existed for 3,000 to 4,000 years. And one of the hallmarks of mound-building peoples is that we built mounds. And these were used for a variety of different reasons, but one of the most important ones, especially in the latter period, which was known as the Mississippian period, was to show dominance and power on the landscape. So these really tall mounds, similar to the Aztecs and Mayans, would have been built, and then the supreme chiefs would have built their housing and their temples on top of these mounds. This left a really loud and clear message that we are powerful and we are mighty. We can kind of look over our domain for many miles, and it set a really strong message. Woodland societies were smaller tribal groups on the landscape. Again, another phenomenon. Most of these were Siouan, because usually these larger and powerful chiefdoms would have taken over these smaller groups. And for whatever reason, if they were kind of tribute or subservient to these other tribes, they seemed to live pretty well among one another, and I'm putting that lightly. Now, here's something interesting about all of these different political structures, is that most of them were governed by women. Most of them had female chiefs that had absolute and supreme power. This was also a big, let's applaud that many. This was another problem for the Spanish, and man, the Spanish did not get it right. because they said, as they encountered all of these different women, and they asked the men, who were like, don't ask us, how and why do you give your women so much power? And why do you let them rule over your societies? And they're like, don't ask us. Why are you asking us? And so as they continue to question this, and they said, your men are weak. You guys are weak because you're letting these women rule over you. And so what did the women do? They unleashed their warriors to get rid of the Spanish. So they really got a sense of female power in that conversation. Again, which is why we're not speaking Spanish today. So in addition to having absolute and supreme power, and I'm not saying that there weren't any male leaders, there certainly were, and sometimes it was by lineage. So if a son was next in line, he would be a leader. If a woman was next in line, she would be a leader. Our clans, each of these societies was also sub-governed by clan systems. Each of the clan systems had clan mothers. And it was the women who made the decision about how tribes were ran, how their individual communities were, their day-to-day was governed, when men should hunt, when they should go to war, different decisions about the community. In fact, a lot of us are familiar with the fate of John Lawson and De Graffin here, and it was not pretty. That decision and that method of punishment and death was decided by women. That decision of death and punishment was inflicted by women. That's pretty powerful. So I just wanted to, everybody's like, yikes. Yes, I know. I wanted to point out that Powhatan's mantle, even though this is after the time period that we're thinking about, still survives. It is in the British Museum in England. I know for a while it was on view, and I think it's been taken down, but it's really interesting to know that there's an object that's that old that still exists. This feather mantle, or this feather cape, made of turkey feathers, is the typical type of mantle or robe that a leader would have worn. And that, when you saw that, that signaled that that was the chief or leader of that community. There is a wonderful lady named Lisa Rutherford, who is Cherokee out in Oklahoma, who has revived the netting system that holds the feathers together. So essentially, she has brought back this entire tradition of feather mantles. And Eastern Band has reclaimed that tradition. And they even do the capelets for the beloved woman. And these capelets are made of swan feathers, and they're just absolutely stunning. Yes, there, I should have included that. Let's see here. I told y'all we're like family, so I'm just going to talk it out here. Okay. So next I want to look at, in addition to government structure and leadership, are the three different religions and worldviews. So I want to be careful here that, out of respect for religious beliefs of Native peoples, that I don't say too much. So everything is going to be sort of cursory, and I just want to kind of put some things out there just to share, and even for contrast. The big thing to think about between these three groups, and as they're living together, is that they did share an overall interlinking value system. It's also interesting that most of their origin stories include two specific elements that not only is represented in eastern North Carolina, but pretty much throughout the southeast United States, in that the origin stories relate to a great flood and how the world was reinvented after a great flood. And the other is the reoccurrence of stories around twins. And usually there's a good twin and a bad twin that represents good and evil, or the yin and the yang, the natural tension within the world that we live, and stories about and values about how to be good and combat evil. So these value systems overall are about kindness towards one another, goodness towards humanity, taking care of one another, especially through the virtue of reciprocity, fairness, and then seeking favor from the Creator. So that is kind of uniform between the Algonquin, the Siouan, and the Iroquoian. So the Algonquin imagery that's represented in the middle really speaks to this 1491 moment and has certainly changed for Algonquin peoples over time. Today, most Algonquin people, or many, I should say, not most, are Christian. A lot of them are Baptist. As you get up into the Great Lakes region and the Northeast region, there's different versions of their traditional religion than it was here in North Carolina and certainly around Virginia. So this is a depiction of a ceremony that John White captured. One of the things that was of particular interest or fascination was the amount of movement that he captured in this image. So when this watercolor made it back to England, the fact that they were dancing in such unique postures and movement fascinated the crown. So essentially at this time, the Algonquin believed that there were 5 gods, that there was one almighty paramount God with 4 gods who represented the domains of the 4 directions. For the Iroquoian people, still following their traditional religion, which is actually Sky Dome is represented here on the end, they practice what is known as the Longhouse religion and also the Great Law of Peace that came about a little bit later in the early 1500s. They also have a story about how the world was created, where Sky Woman fell from the sky, and as she was falling, she grabbed branches of the tree of peace and brought with her things like cedar, tobacco, and strawberries as sacrament for ceremony. And as she fell, the animals scrambled to help save her. It goes on to where she gives birth to twins. One was good, one was bad, and then kind of the sagas that follow with that. And the other unique thing that is represented between the Sky Dome and the Mississippian cosmology is that Native peoples believe, just like Reggie spoke about earlier, there is an upper world, a middle world, and a lower world. And I think even when colonists first came into contact with Native peoples, there was a familiarity with that, right? Upper world, today we would associate with heaven. Middle world is the land and the earth that we live on today. And the underworld could be seen as not a great place. And so that's a little bit of what the Sky Dome represents. And then the curls represent 2 things. One are the twins, and then the other is also the Tree of Peace. And then with the Mississippian cosmology, they were much more sophisticated, or not comparing the two, but very sophisticated iconography that organized these worlds. So you have the feathered serpent, Birdman, on the upper world, and then you have sort of these panther figures, and then that cross that's in the middle are the 4 sacred logs that represent the 4 directions. And then in the underworld, you have the whirling log, which is sort of mixing or spinning those 4 directions. The underwater panther, the old woman who never dies, is at the very bottom. And then you can see the star systems are inverted. And then, of course, another tree of peace or a tree of life. So you can see the similarities in these worldviews and cosmologies and religions of these people, but also they are uniquely different as well. So the other thing that I want to talk about briefly is that Native peoples in eastern North Carolina were fierce riparian people. Does anybody recognize that gentleman standing on this canoe right here? When I say fierce riparian peoples, that's what I mean. So we are surrounded by rivers and our ancestral waters. And so we were traversing these spaces and creating dugout canoes, many of which have been found very recently in and around our areas, older canoes. If 4 or 5 people were on a, now Reggie could do this single-handedly, we know. But back in the day, if 4 or 5 people, 4 or 5 men would have been on a canoe, they could travel at speeds on moving water between 40 and 50 miles an hour. That's power on a single canoe. We didn't sit in our canoes, we stood in our canoes because we're warriors. No. because logistically, you have more power. And, in our regions in eastern North Carolina, we have swamps, we have marshes, we have sandbars. Our water conditions change from 1 mile to the next, so that helps us navigate. These canoes are flat on the bottom. Of course, they're created through the burnout method and the dugout method, and that's how we would build our canoes out of cypress and pine. This is actually a canoe that we built at the Museum of the Southeast American Indian, and we did it with community. We invited folks to come out every Saturday and help build a canoe with the lead of Kevin Melvin, which was wonderful.
How long does it take to build it?
That is a great question. It took us a long time. No, just one Saturday a month. But if you were working on it steady, probably a couple of weeks. And that's almost around the clock of keeping the fire going, moving it out and then smoothing out the coals and shaping it and testing a little bit. It could take a little bit less depending on the size of the canoe. And of course, our waterways were our highways, right? That's how we connected with one another. So we know that these canoes that we built could do rivers, lakes, Carolina bays, sounds, and they were also ocean faring. I've talked a lot about the Spanish. One of the things that the Spanish noted, especially down around South Carolina and at the North Carolina-South Carolina line, is that our canoes made it to their ships faster than they could get their smaller boats off to come to shore. And we were on their ships within a matter of minutes questioning what were they doing, why were they there, and what goods did they have to trade. So I wanted to point that out, and again, thinking about bounded space and where we're from. And I want to close with 2 final slides, and I'm sure I'm way over time, but I'm enjoying myself here. I hope you all are. Is that we're not perfect, okay? And I've described a lot about these societies and how they're structured. And of course, in this time frame, these little vignettes that we get, like Francisco de Chicora, we can point out to culture and how we live, but having these luminaries is hard to pull out. What we do know is that we weren't perfect. We overplanted, we overhunted, we slaved other tribes, we engaged in warfare, we did societal takeovers, we were overthrowing rulers, we lost faith in religion, we had crippling taxation, and then the human nature factor, right? Corrupt leaders, these actors of time that come in and do things that change the course of history and people. Does any of that sound familiar? Yes. So a lot of times, it's so funny, in my different roles, and certainly a lot of Native peoples, people will come up and say, it was just so perfect and wonderful before. And I'm thinking, no, it wasn't. It was not. There were a lot of regular human things that happened. This list is really what sets us off for this next program. These are the things that people were interested in when they encountered first the Spanish and then, of course, the English, and then how things take hold, right? What were the opportunities for new and different lands to take over other people, to engage in the slave market, warfare among one another, societal takeovers, overthrowing rulers, like using to corrupt the Spanish and others to their advantage. So I wanted to point that out, and that fantastic Iroquoian War Club out there, just had to show that. And then also a Catawba peace pipe to show war and peace here at the same time. So with that said, there was transformative change that was on the horizon. So we've been in our 1491 moment. We've explored Native culture and identity. And obviously we know that this is one of the famous John White watercolors, and this is a Native woman with her daughter. I want to point out one thing real quickly. She is wearing strands of pearls, and she has her hand very delicately draped through these pearls, which indicated she was a woman of status. If you'll also take a look, that her daughter is carrying a what? A doll. This is the first time in recorded history that a Native person has been recorded carrying an English good. The innocence of a doll. And John, just like you would with a camera, in this case a painting, John White captured this moment. What's important about this is that trade goods would be at the very center of what brought Native peoples and European peoples together from this moment forward. And each of our existences would never be the same again. What a captivating moment to have recorded, and what an interesting item for it to have been recorded. The innocence of a doll and a little girl, and certainly her future was changed forever. Our next program, we are going to talk about her future, probably what her life was like, the coming together of European and Native peoples, particularly around the Atlantic trade that brought together Africa, the Caribbean, and the New World through goods, things like sugar and guns and tobacco. And we're going to look at how that facilitated the developing and what would ultimately become the United States. So thank you all so much for your time. Most of all, thank you for your attention and making me feel so welcome and giving me this really unique opportunity to just share, just scratch the surface about Native people in Eastern North Carolina pre-contact. It was an absolute honor and a privilege. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we're not out of content, but we are out of time. And thank you, Nancy. This is just the opening. We've got a lot more to discuss, and I hope that you spread the word regarding what we're doing with community class. I think the next episode, as I will call it in September, you're going to learn a lot about John Lawson, what happened to him. So if you're interested in that kind of drama, you certainly need to come back in September. And then Nancy's going to wrap up her speaker series in November, which is Indigenous History Month. So come see us again in September and in November. Look to our website. And I also want to take a moment. Miss Ann Shaw, would you stand for just a moment, please? I'm going to ask her to stand because I want everyone to understand that Tryon Palace is a public-private partnership. It takes money. Hold on. It takes money to do these things. She had a table out front. If you are interested in supporting Tryon Palace, please go to our website, join our foundation, give an unrestricted donation so that we can continue this kind of programming. So thank you, Ann, for having that table for us tonight. This concludes tonight's program. Call us, email us with questions. Please be safe tonight, and we look forward to seeing you in September.